The morning sun filtered through half-drawn blinds as William Taylor opened his eyes. At 58, his body still woke up at 5:30 a.m. sharp, a habit from his years in the Secret Service. No alarm needed. 25 years of protecting presidents had permanently set his internal clock. William stretched and winced at the familiar ache in his right shoulder. He had taken a bullet there 15 years ago during an attempted assassination. The scar tissue still reminded him every morning of how close that day had been. His modest suburban home was quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a retirement gift from his colleagues. The walls of his study were covered with framed photographs, William standing behind 3 different presidents, a younger version of himself in his first-day uniform, and team photos with fellow agents who had become like family. Another day in paradise, he muttered to himself as he made his bed with military precision, corners tucked tight enough to bounce a quarter. Some habits never die. After a quick shower, William dressed in simple clothes, navy blue pants, and a crisp white button-down shirt, nothing flashy. Years of blending into backgrounds while scanning for threats had given him a preference for staying unnoticed. Breakfast was always the same: 2 eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. William ate while reading the morning newspaper, actual paper, not digital. He circled interesting stories with a red pen, an old habit from his days analyzing potential security threats. His neighbor Tom waved from across the street while collecting his mail. "Morning, Will. Still keeping government hours in retirement?" William smiled and waved back. Few people in the neighborhood knew about his past career. To them, he was just a retired government employee who kept to himself, but was always ready to help fix a fence or jump-start a car. After breakfast, William spent an hour tending to his vegetable garden in the backyard. Growing things gave him peace. Watching life develop under his care was the opposite of his former job, where he was constantly looking for danger. He checked his tomatoes, carefully staking a plant that had started to lean. By late afternoon, William realized he was out of groceries. He checked his watch, 5:45 p.m. The store would be busy with after-work shoppers, but he needed to go. He made a quick list: milk, bread, chicken, vegetables, and coffee. Maybe some ice cream too, a small luxury he allowed himself on weekdays. William grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, slipped on his leather jacket, and headed to his car, a reliable blue sedan, nothing fancy. The kind of car that wouldn't draw attention. As he drove down Maple Street, William mentally reviewed his day tomorrow. He had volunteered to speak to troubled kids at the community center about second chances and making good choices. These talks had become important to him in retirement, a way to give back without revealing too much about his past. The grocery store was just 3 miles away. William turned on the radio, catching the tail end of the news. Something about local politics. He wasn't paying close attention as he signaled to turn into the parking lot of Value Foods. He didn't notice the police cruiser that had pulled up behind him, lights suddenly flashing. William checked his rearview mirror, surprised. Had he done something wrong? He couldn't think of any traffic rules he'd broken. With the instincts of a career security professional, William put on his turn signal, pulled into a parking space, and placed both hands visible on the steering wheel. Standard procedure when being pulled over: make the officer feel safe. He had no idea that this routine grocery trip was about to change everything. No idea that the officer approaching his car carried prejudices that would blindside him. No idea that his past career was about to collide with the present in a way he never expected. William Taylor was just a man trying to buy groceries on a Tuesday evening. But the next few minutes would remind America of problems much deeper than an empty refrigerator. Officer Ray Wilson had been on patrol for 6 hours, and his mood was getting worse by the minute. 3 domestic disturbance calls with no arrests, a fender bender with mountains of paperwork, and a supervisor who'd been writing him about his attitude problem after last month's civilian complaint. "Just need one good bus to end the day," he muttered, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel as he watched traffic from his spot behind the billboard. That's when he noticed the blue sedan rolling through a yellow light. The driver was an older black man, driving alone. Wilson's eyes narrowed. The light had barely turned yellow, and the car wasn't speeding. There was no real violation, but something about the driver bothered him. Wilson couldn't quite put his finger on it, Or rather, he wouldn't admit to himself what it really was. He pulled his cruiser onto the road, following the sedan at a distance. "Let's see what you're up to," he said to himself, running the plate. Clean record. Registered to William Taylor. No outstanding tickets. Wilson frowned, disappointed. When the sedan signaled and turned into the Value Foods parking lot, Wilson made his decision. He flipped on his lights and hit the siren briefly. Through his windshield, he could see Taylor looking surprised in his rearview mirror. The sedan properly signaled again and pulled into a parking space. Wilson called in the stop, grabbed his flashlight even though it wasn't dark yet, and approached the vehicle. He noticed the driver had both hands visible on the steering wheel, something that struck him as suspicious rather than considerate. "License and registration," Wilson barked before even reaching the window. He stood slightly behind the driver's door, hand resting near his weapon, a stance far more aggressive than the situation warranted. "Good evening, officer," William said calmly. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Wilson's jaw tightened. "You ran a red light back there. License and registration. Now." "The light was yellow, sir," William replied, his voice steady but not challenging. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket, and my registration is in the glove compartment." "Just hurry up," Wilson snapped, watching every movement with exaggerated suspicion. William handed over his driver's license. As he reached toward the glove compartment, Wilson suddenly yanked the door open. "Get out of the car." "Officer, I'm just getting my registration as you requested," William explained, freezing in place. "I said get out." Now, Wilson's voice rose, drawing the attention of shoppers walking to their cars. A young woman with a phone paused, then slowly raised it to record what was happening. William took a deep breath and carefully stepped out of the car, moving with deliberate slowness. At 58, he stood straight but unthreatening, his hands visible at all times. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle," Wilson ordered, his voice still too loud for the situation. "Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I'd be happy to explain." "No explanation needed. You're being uncooperative," Wilson cut him off, despite William's obvious compliance. "I need to check your vehicle." "Do you have probable cause, officer?" William asked quietly. "I don't consent to a search." Those words triggered something in Wilson. His face flushed red. "You think you know the law?" Hands on the car. Now. More people had gathered, watching silently. The young woman had been joined by an older man with a phone also recording. William was acutely aware of the situation escalating beyond reason, but his decades of training in high-pressure situations kept him composed. "I'm complying, officer," he said, placing his hands on the roof of his sedan. "But I want to be clear that I've done nothing wrong." Wilson moved closer, his breath hot on William's neck. "They all say that." The words hung in the air between them. William didn't respond, but a small muscle twitched in his jaw. "What's in the car?" Wilson demanded, peering through the windows. "Why are you so nervous about me looking in there?" "I'm not nervous, officer. I simply know my rights." Wilson scoffed. "Rights? Sure." He circled William like a predator. "Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why this neighborhood?" Each question came faster than the last, not giving William time to answer. It wasn't about information anymore, it was intimidation. Pure and simple. In the distance, a siren wailed, heading somewhere else entirely. But the sound seemed to hang over the scene like a warning of what was coming next. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Officer Wilson ordered, pulling handcuffs from his belt. The metal gleamed under the parking lot lights that had just flickered on as evening approached. William remained calm, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being arrested?" Resisting an officer and suspicious behavior, Wilson snapped, though William had been nothing but cooperative. "Stop talking and turn around." By now, at least 7 people stood watching. 4 had phones out, recording everything. An older woman shook her head in disbelief. A man in a store uniform had stepped outside, walkie-talkie in hand. "I'm going to comply, but I want to state clearly that I've done nothing wrong," William said, his voice steady as he turned and put his hands behind his back. The cool metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, too tight. A deliberate discomfort William recognized from his training days. 25 years in the Secret Service had taught William exactly how to handle this situation. Don't escalate. Document everything mentally. Complain now, address injustice later through proper channels. But knowing the procedure didn't make the humiliation any less real. My wallet has my ID in it, William said quietly. If you check it. Shut up, Wilson cut him off, roughly patting down William's sides and legs. Finding nothing, his frustration seemed to grow. What were you planning to do in this neighborhood anyway? I live 3 blocks from here, William replied evenly. I was going to buy groceries, as I mentioned. Officer Wilson scoffed, gripping William's arm too tightly as he marched him toward the patrol car. Yeah, right. We've had reports of drug activity in this area. Check my ID, William repeated. I've lived here for 5 years since I retired. A young man stepped forward from the gathering crowd. Hey, I know this guy. He helps coach at the community center. He's not doing anything wrong. Back off, Wilson barked at him. Unless you want to join him. The young man stepped back, but kept recording with his phone. This isn't right, man. Everyone can see that. William caught the young man's eye and gave a small shake of his head. Don't make this worse. He'd seen situations like this escalate into tragedy too many times. As Wilson pushed William toward the back of the patrol car, an older woman called out, I'm calling the station right now. This is wrong. Wilson ignored her, roughly guiding William's head down as he pushed him into the back seat. The door slammed shut, and William found himself caged behind the mesh divider, watching the world through the window like a scene from someone else's life. Inside the car, the reality hit him hard. Despite his distinguished career, despite his perfect record, despite his calm compliance, here he was, handcuffed in the back of a police car because of one officer's prejudice. The injustice of it burned in his chest, but he kept his face neutral, aware that the dashboard camera was recording him. Wilson got into the driver's seat, slamming the door. He didn't speak as he started the engine, but William could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight grip on the steering wheel. Something about this stop wasn't going according to the officer's plan. As they pulled away from Value Foods, William caught a final glimpse of the growing crowd, of phones pointed their way, of people shaking their heads. His groceries would remain unbought, his dinner uncooked. But something told him food would be the least of his concerns tonight. In the confined space of the patrol car, William methodically memorized details. The time, 6:22 p.m. according to the car's clock. The officer's badge number visible on his chest, the rough route they were taking to the station. Information was power, and William had spent a lifetime collecting information in challenging situations. The radio crackled. Unit 47, confirm your status on that traffic stop at Value Foods on Maple. Wilson grabbed the radio. Unit 47, subject in custody. En route to station for processing. Copy that. What's the charge? There was a slight pause. Resisting an officer and suspected drug activity. William raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Drug activity, that was new. The charge was evolving, growing more serious as Wilson tried to justify his actions. Stand by 47. The dispatcher's voice had a strange note to it. The silence stretched between them as they drove through familiar streets. William had protected presidents through assassination attempts, international incidents, and terrorist threats. He had never imagined he would be the one needing protection from those sworn to uphold the law. You picked the wrong day to give me trouble, Wilson muttered, almost to himself. William met his eyes in the rearview mirror. I didn't give you any trouble, officer, but I think you might have given yourself some. Wilson's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as they pulled into the police station parking lot, where an unusual number of officers seemed to be gathering near the entrance. The police station doors swung open as Officer Wilson led William inside, still handcuffed and walking with perfect posture despite the circumstances. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering glow. Got one for processing, Wilson announced to the desk sergeant, pushing the paperwork forward. Resisting an officer and suspected drug activity. The desk sergeant, an older man with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, glanced up from his computer. His eyes moved from Wilson to William, then widened in unmistakable recognition. Holy, he whispered, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Is that William Taylor? William nodded once, his expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Sergeant Phillips. It's been a while." Wilson's head snapped between them. "You know him?" "Know him?" Phillips laughed in disbelief. "Wilson, you idiot. That's William Taylor, former Secret Service. He coordinated security when President Howard visited 5 years ago." Phillips came around the desk, shaking his head. "For God's sake, take those cuffs off him." Wilson stood frozen, his face draining of color. And he was. "I was driving to the grocery store," William finished for him, voice level, before being stopped for a yellow light that Officer Wilson claimed was red. Phillips himself removed the handcuffs, apologizing under his breath. "Someone called the chief," he said to no one in particular, though 3 officers were already reaching for phones. The station had gone eerily quiet. Officers paused in their tasks, staring at the scene unfolding before them. A young rookie whispered to his partner, "That's DHE William Taylor, the one who took a bullet in Singapore." William rubbed his wrists where the too tight cuffs had left marks. "I'd like to make a phone call, if you don't mind." Of course, Phillips said, ushering him toward a private office rather than the usual phone bank for detainees. "Use the phone in here. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." William's courtesy remained intact, though a muscle twitched in his jaw, the only outward sign of his contained anger. As Phillips hurried away, William noticed Wilson being cornered by a lieutenant whose finger jabbed the air inches from Wilson's chest. Other officers kept their distance from Wilson, their expressions ranging from disgust to embarrassment. Inside the office, William dialed a number from memory. "Alan? It's William. I'm going to need your legal services." He paused. "No, I'm fine. I've been arrested." Another pause. "Value Foods parking lot on Maple." Apparently, grocery shopping while black is still a crime in some officers' books. Through the glass windows of the office, William could see more commotion as a heavy-set man with a police chief's uniform burst through a door, face flushed with what appeared to be both anger and embarrassment. The chief spotted William through the glass, and his expression shifted to one of horrified recognition. William wrapped up his call. "Thanks, Alan. I'll see you soon." The door opened and the chief entered, extending his hand. "Mr. Taylor, I'm Chief Roberts." "I can't begin to tell you how." "Save it," William said, not unkindly but firmly. "What happened today isn't about apologies. It's about a systemic problem. One that nearly cost a citizen, me, his dignity and freedom because of an officer's bias." Roberts winced but nodded. "You're right. Absolutely right." He sat down heavily across from William. "Officer Wilson has had complaints before. Nothing stuck. But this," he gestured vaguely at William, "this changes things." "It shouldn't take arresting a former federal agent for change to happen," William pointed out. "What if I had been just an ordinary citizen? Would my complaint matter then?" The chief had no answer for that. Outside the office, William could see that news was spreading. Officers were on phones, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Wilson sat alone at a desk, filling out paperwork with shaking hands, his earlier bravado completely deflated. An officer knocked and entered with a tablet. "Sir, you should see this. The incident is already on social media." He handed the tablet to the chief, who watched with growing dismay. William leaned forward. "May I?" The tablet showed 4 different videos of his arrest, filmed by bystanders. In one, the young man could be clearly heard saying, "I know this guy. He helps coach at the community center." In another, the tight handcuffs and William's perfect compliance were clearly visible. "My lawyer will want copies of those," William said quietly. The chief nodded. "Of course." He hesitated. "Mr. Taylor, I want you to know that this department doesn't condone." "With all due respect," William interrupted, "what your department condones or doesn't condone is less important than what it allows to happen." He stood up, straightening his shirt. "Actions speak louder than policy manuals, Chief Roberts." Through the window, William saw a familiar face enter the station, Alan Chen, his attorney and former colleague from his government days. It was time to begin the real work of justice beyond just clearing his own name. The chief seemed to shrink in his chair as the full weight of the situation settled on his shoulders. This wasn't just an incident. This was going to be a reckoning. The next morning, William sat at his kitchen table, coffee untouched as his phone buzzed nonstop. News vans lined his street. His neighbor Tom had already called twice, shocked to discover his quiet neighbor's former career and current situation. "They're saying you protected 3 presidents," Tom had said, voice filled with awe. "Why didn't you ever mention it?" William had simply replied, "It was my job, not my identity." But now his past and present had collided in ways he never expected. On his laptop screen, local news played footage of last night's incident. The headline read, "Former Secret Service agent racially profiled and wrongfully arrested." William's lawyer, Alan Chen, sat across from him, scrolling through emails on his phone. "The police department has issued a formal apology. They want to meet this afternoon." "An apology isn't enough," William said, finally taking a sip of his cold coffee. "Not when this happens every day to people without my connections." Alan nodded in understanding. "What do you want to do?" William looked out his window at the news vans. "I want to use this moment, make it mean something beyond just my case." His doorbell rang. Alan checked his watch. That'll be Howard. Howard Jackson was William's former supervisor at the Secret Service, now retired as well. The 2 men had faced danger together for nearly 2 decades. When William opened the door, Howard embraced him without a word, then stepped back to examine him. "You okay?" Howard asked, his eyes searching William's face. "I've had better grocery trips," William replied with a wry smile. Howard shook his head. "I've already had calls from Thompson and Rivera. Everyone's furious. The director himself might make a statement." "I don't need special treatment because I was Secret Service," William protested as they walked to the kitchen. "It's not special treatment," Howard countered. "It's visibility. This happened to the wrong person, or maybe the right person, depending on how you look at it. Someone who can't be ignored." William's phone rang again. This time, it was a local community organizer named Diane, who ran the center where William volunteered. "Everyone here is behind you," she said when he answered. "The kids are asking about you. And people are gathering at City Hall right now. They're demanding accountability." William felt a strange mix of emotions. The support was touching, but the attention uncomfortable. He had spent his career in the background, making sure others remained safe while he stayed invisible. "The police chief is doing a press conference at noon," Alan announced, looking up from his laptop. "They've already placed Officer Wilson on administrative leave." "That's not enough," Howard said sharply. "He should be fired. There were multiple violations of procedure, not to mention civil rights." William sat quietly, thinking. After a moment he said, "I want to meet with the community first, before I talk to the police." Both men looked at him in surprise. "This isn't just about me," William explained. "If I handle this privately with the department, nothing changes. But if I work with the community that's been facing this for years..." He trailed off, then continued with more conviction. "We could use this moment to push for real reforms." By mid-afternoon, William sat in a packed community center. People of all ages filled every chair, with more standing along the walls. Many wore T-shirts hastily made with slogans like "Justice for All" and "Stand with William." Camera crews hovered near the back. Diane introduced him simply. "Many of you know William as the quiet man who helps with our youth programs. What you didn't know is that he spent 25 years protecting our nation's leaders. Last night, he couldn't even protect himself from injustice." When William stood to speak, the room fell silent. "I'm not comfortable being in the spotlight," he began, his voice steady but warm. "I spent my career making sure bad things didn't happen to other people. But last night, something bad did happen, not just to me, but to our community's trust in those sworn to protect us." An older woman in the front row nodded vigorously, dabbing at her eyes. "What makes my case different isn't that it happened," William continued. "It's that people are listening. And I intend to use that attention to make sure they hear all of us." The room erupted in applause. As it died down, William outlined a plan to meet with the police department, not just for an apology, but with specific demands for change. Better training, community oversight, body camera reforms, and consequences for officers with patterns of biased behavior. "This isn't about revenge," he told them. "It's about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else in this community." As the meeting went on, William's phone buzzed with a text. It was from his former Secret Service team. a group chat he rarely used these days. The message simply read, "We've got your back. Always." Attached was a photo of his old team, standing together at his retirement party 5 years ago. For the first time since the arrest, William felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had protected others for 25 years. Now it seemed they were returning the favor. 3 weeks after the arrest, William sat in a conference room at City Hall. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles in the air. Across the table sat Police Chief Roberts, the mayor, 2 city council members, and the police department's legal team. Alan Chen sat beside William, legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "We've reviewed all the evidence," the mayor said, adjusting her glasses. "The body camera footage, witness videos, and Officer Wilson's record of previous complaints." She cleared her throat. "The city would like to offer a settlement and a formal public apology." "I'm not interested in money," William replied, his voice calm but firm. "I want change." William slid a folder across the table. Inside was a detailed proposal developed with community leaders over the past weeks. "These are our terms." The chief opened the folder cautiously, as if it might contain something explosive. In a way, it did. Mandatory bias training, community oversight board with actual authority, revised use of force protocols, body cameras that can't be turned off. The chief read aloud, his eyebrows rising. Quarterly public reporting of stop statistics by race and neighborhood. "Yes," William confirmed. "Everything in that folder represents what the community needs, not just what would make my case go away." The mayor and council members exchanged glances. The city attorney leaned forward. "Mr. Taylor, while we appreciate your civic-mindedness, these demands are extensive. Perhaps we could focus on your specific incident." "My specific incident is just one example of a pattern," William interrupted politely but firmly. "I'm in a unique position to address that pattern, and I intend to do so." Alan added, "We should note that my client has not yet spoken directly to the press, despite numerous requests. He's giving you the opportunity to be partners in reform rather than targets of a media firestorm." The implied threat hung in the air. William's case had already generated national attention. His background made him the perfect spokesman for the issue. A man who had literally taken a bullet to protect the country's leaders, now racially profiled in his own neighborhood. "We need time to review this," the mayor said finally. William smiled slightly. "Take all the time you need. The community has been waiting for decades. A few more days won't matter." As they left City Hall, reporters shouted questions from behind a barricade. William nodded politely but didn't stop. He had decided early on that he would control his own narrative, not feed the 24-hour news cycle. "You did well in there," Alan said as they walked to the car. "You've got them cornered." "This isn't about winning or losing," William replied. "It's about fixing something broken." Later that afternoon, William received a call from the district attorney's office. Officer Wilson was facing an internal investigation and possible criminal charges for filing a false report. The dispatcher who had questioned Wilson's charges during the arrest had come forward with additional evidence of misconduct. William took the news with mixed feelings. He didn't want revenge against Wilson, but accountability was necessary for real change. One officer facing consequences wouldn't fix the system, but it was a start. That evening, William visited the community center for his regular volunteer session, helping teenagers with homework and life advice. He had refused to let the case disrupt this part of his routine. 16-year-old Deshawn approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Taylor, is it true you were Secret Service? Like for real?" William nodded. "For 25 years. And you still got pulled over for nothing." The boy looked confused, perhaps even disappointed, as if learning a hard truth about the world. "The uniform I wore then protected me," William explained gently. "But without it, people see what they choose to see." Deshawn thought about this. "So what do we do? If even you got treated like that?" William put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We change things. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone." He looked around the center at the diverse group of kids working on homework. "And we remember that most people, including most officers, are trying to do the right thing. The system needs fixing, not abandoning." A week later, the mayor called a press conference. With William standing nearby, she announced the city's acceptance of every reform in his proposal. Officer Wilson had been terminated from the force and was facing charges for civil rights violations and filing false reports. But the most significant announcement came last. William had agreed to chair the newly formed Community Oversight Board, which would have real authority to review police training, policies, and individual cases of misconduct. As cameras flashed, William thought about the strange journey from grocery shopping to community leadership. He hadn't asked for this role, but as he learned in the Secret Service, sometimes the most important missions find you when you least expect them. "This is just the beginning," he told reporters afterward. "Real change happens over time, not in press conferences." That night, William finally made it to Value Foods to buy groceries. The manager recognized him and approached nervously. "Your groceries are on the house, Mr. Taylor, after what happened." William shook his head. "I appreciate the gesture, but that's not necessary. I'd rather you donate to the community center instead." As he checked out, William noticed a young police officer watching him from across the store. When their eyes met, the officer approached hesitantly. "Sir," the young officer said, "I just wanted to say, what you're doing with the Oversight Board, it's going to make us better officers. Thank you." William nodded, seeing the sincerity in the officer's eyes. This was why he had pushed for reform rather than retribution, to build a better system for everyone, including the good officers who wanted to serve their community with honor. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening in the Value Foods parking lot. The morning air was crisp as William adjusted his tie in the mirror. Today marked his first official presentation at the police academy, a day he never imagined when he retired from the Secret Service. "You nervous?" asked Howard, who had driven over to give moral support. William smiled. "I've briefed presidents before terrorist threats. This should be easier." "Different kind of pressure," Howard noted, handing William a travel mug of coffee. "Those cadets need to hear what you have to say." As they drove to the academy, William looked out at the familiar streets of his neighborhood with new eyes. So much had changed in half a year. The Community Oversight Board was up and running. The police department had implemented new training protocols. Body camera footage was now automatically uploaded and couldn't be deleted. But the most important changes couldn't be measured by policy documents. The academy classroom was filled with young faces when William entered. 42 cadets sat at attention, their expressions a mix of curiosity and nervousness. At the back of the room stood several senior officers, including Chief Roberts, who nodded respectfully to William. "Good morning," William began, setting his notes aside. He'd decided to speak from the heart instead. "I'm not here to lecture you about what went wrong the day I was wrongfully arrested. You've seen the videos. You know the facts." The room was silent, all eyes on him. "Instead, I want to talk about protection. For 25 years, I protected presidents. I stood between them and danger. I anticipated threats. I put their safety above my own." William paced slowly across the front of the room. "Sound familiar? Isn't that what you're training to do? To protect and serve?" Several cadets nodded. "Here's what I learned in those 25 years. Protection isn't just about physical safety. It's about dignity. It's about respecting the people you're sworn to protect." William pulled up a photo on the screen, himself in his Secret Service uniform, standing behind a president. "When I wore this uniform, people saw the job, not the man. They didn't see my skin color. They saw authority. They saw someone to respect." He clicked to another photo, himself in regular clothes, the day of his arrest. Without that uniform, some people saw something very different. A young cadet raised her hand. "Sir, how do we change that?" "If bias is unconscious." "By making it conscious," William replied. "By questioning your instincts. By asking yourself why you're pulling someone over, why you're suspicious, why you're reaching for your weapon." He looked around the room. "And by remembering that the person you're approaching is someone's parent, someone's child, someone who deserves the same respect you'd give anyone else." For the next hour, William shared stories from both his Secret Service days and his recent work with the Community Oversight Board. He didn't sugarcoat the problems, but he also emphasized solutions. "The goal isn't to make you feel guilty or defensive," he told them. "The goal is to make you better officers than the generation before you." After the formal presentation, cadets lined up to speak with him personally. One young man with a serious expression waited until last. "Mr. Taylor," he said quietly, "my uncle is Officer Wilson." William kept his expression neutral, waiting. "I just wanted to say," he was wrong. "What happened to you changed our whole family. He's getting help now, trying to understand his biases. It's why I'm here actually, to do better than he did." William extended his hand. That takes courage, to learn from someone else's mistakes instead of repeating them. That afternoon, William visited the community center where a new program was starting, regular dialogues between police officers and local teenagers. The first session had been awkward, with both sides hesitant to speak openly. But by the third meeting, real conversations were happening. Today, an officer was teaching interested teens about proper traffic stop procedures, while another group discussed community concerns about police presence in their neighborhood. Deshawn, now working as a peer leader, caught William's eye and gave him a thumbs up. Later, William sat in his backyard, watching the sunset. His garden had suffered during the months he'd been busy with the oversight board and speaking engagements, but new sprouts were pushing through the soil. Like everything worthwhile, they just needed time and attention to grow. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane at the community center. "CNN wants to interview you about the program. You up for it?" William thought for a moment before typing his reply. "Yes, but only if they include the officers and teenagers too. This isn't about me anymore." As darkness fell, William remembered something his first Secret Service supervisor had told him decades ago. "Our job isn't just to take a bullet. It's to make sure no bullet needs to be taken." He understood that wisdom differently now. His current mission wasn't just about addressing what had happened to him. It was about creating a world where such incidents became increasingly rare, where protection meant something deeper than physical safety, where uniforms didn't determine who deserved respect. It was the most important protection detail of his life, not for one leader, but for an entire community. And unlike his Secret Service days, this mission would have no retirement date.